In 1987, social worker Judith Caldwell spent 40 minutes inside the Hollister farmhouse near Hurley, Virginia. She documented her observations, noted no concerns, and closed the case. She never saw the white cotton dress hanging in a plastic bag in Katie's closet. The dress Katie wore every Sunday when the men came. The dress that smelled like basement concrete and her mother's cold hands. Before we dive into the story, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't just another disturbing tale. This is Katie's truth. A childhood stolen in the mountains, where help couldn't reach and silence was enforced through terror. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever screamed for help and nobody heard, this story will shake you. Click the like button and subscribe so you never miss the stories that demand to be told. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there, because Katie's voice deserves to echo across every corner of this world. Now, let's continue with the story. Judith Caldwell had been a social worker for Buchanan County Child Services for 11 years when the anonymous call came through on a Tuesday morning. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman, middle-aged by the sound of it, speaking barely above a whisper. She described 2 children she'd seen at the Hurley General Store the previous weekend. The little girl had bruises on her arms that looked like fingerprints. The boy wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Caldwell took down the details, though the caller refused to give her name before hanging up. The description led to a family named Hollister living somewhere in the hollows outside town. It took Caldwell 3 weeks to locate the property. The address existed only as a rural route number, and the gravel road leading to the house bore no street sign. She drove 12 miles down increasingly narrow passages until she reached a 2-story farmhouse that seemed to lean slightly to the left, its white paint peeling in long strips. Donald Hollister answered the door wearing work clothes stained with sawdust from the timber mill, where he'd recently started a new position, 28 miles away. He seemed surprised but pleasant when Caldwell introduced herself and explained she was following up on a community concern. Linda Hollister appeared moments later, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile warm and welcoming. She called for the children. Katie emerged first, 8 years old, with dark blonde hair pulled into 2 tight braids. Her dress hung loose on her small frame, but she appeared clean and adequately nourished. Jessie followed, 6 years old, gripping a toy truck. Both children stood quietly while Caldwell asked them simple questions about their daily routine. Katie answered in soft, complete sentences. Neither child appeared frightened of their parents. Linda explained they homeschooled for religious reasons, using a Christian curriculum ordered through a catalogue. She showed Caldwell workbooks filled with completed assignments in Katie's careful handwriting. Donald mentioned the financial difficulties of the past few years, but noted things were looking up with his new job. The house, while cluttered with laundry and dishes, showed no signs of neglect or danger. Cooperative parents. Children appropriately responsive. No visible injuries. No evidence of maltreatment. She thanked the Hollisters for their time, left her card in case they needed any family services, and drove back down the mountain, feeling satisfied she'd done her due diligence. The case was closed within 48 hours. The manila folder joined hundreds of others in the metal filing cabinet. What Caldwell never discovered was the false wall Donald had constructed in the kitchen pantry 6 months earlier. The one that concealed a basement door with a deadbolt lock, accessible only from the main floor. She never saw the renovated space below with its carpet remnants and space heater. She never learned about the Sunday gatherings that had been occurring for 3 years by that point, or the network of men who drove from surrounding counties to visit the Hollister home every weekend. Katie watched through the living room window as the social worker's car disappeared down the gravel road. She was 8 years old. She had just failed her only chance at rescue, though she didn't understand that yet. In 3 days, it would be Sunday again. Katie's earliest memory of understanding something was wrong came when she was 5 years old. Every Sunday afternoon, her mother would wake her from her nap, dress her in a white cotton dress that Linda kept hanging in a plastic bag in the closet, and tell her that Uncle Vernon and the church friends were coming over for fellowship. The gatherings had begun in 1984, shortly after Donald lost his position at the timber mill, and the family fell 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. Vernon Tackett, a 53-year-old delivery driver from Bluefield, West Virginia, had approached Donald at a Speedway gas station with an offer that would help them keep their home. Court records later revealed that Tackett had been arrested twice in the 1970s for indecent exposure, but never convicted due to lack of witnesses willing to testify. The Sunday gatherings typically involved 6 to 8 men, ages 40 to 65, who would arrive between 2 and 5 in the afternoon. Katie learned to recognize the sound of their vehicles coming up the gravel road. A blue Ford pickup, a brown Chevy sedan with a rattling muffler, a white van with no windows in the back. Linda would prepare lemonade and cookies, arranging them on the coffee table in the living room as though this were an ordinary church social. The men would talk with Donald for 30 minutes. They discussed weather, logging conditions, news from surrounding counties. Their voices carried a casual friendliness that Katie found confusing even as a small child, because their eyes told a different story. When they looked at her, their expressions changed into something she had no words to describe. Then Linda would take Katie downstairs. Jessie was kept upstairs with Donald during these hours, told to watch television with the volume turned up high. Donald would give him a pile of candy bars and comic books. Jessie learned not to ask questions about where his sister went or why the basement door stayed locked for hours. He learned that cooperation meant rewards and curiosity meant punishment. The first time it happened, Katie was so young she didn't understand what was being done to her. She only knew it hurt and that her mother stood nearby watching without helping. Linda told her this was what good girls did for their families. Linda explained that this was normal, that every family had special Sunday gatherings, and that talking about it to anyone outside the family meant they would all be separated and sent to terrible places. By the time she was 8 years old and Judith Caldwell came to investigate, Katie had experienced these gatherings for 3 years. She had learned to answer questions from strangers with careful, practiced responses. She had learned to hide the truth behind polite smiles and quiet obedience. She had learned that rescue didn't exist for children like her, because the one adult who came looking had seen nothing wrong. The Sunday after Caldwell's visit proceeded exactly as all the others had. Vernon Tackett arrived first carrying a bag of groceries as payment. 4 other men followed throughout the afternoon. Linda prepared the lemonade and cookies. The men talked with Donald in the living room. Katie wore the white cotton dress. And when it was over, Linda gave Katie a bath, braided her hair, and told her what a good girl she'd been. Then Linda made dinner as though nothing had happened. Pork chops and green beans. Donald said grace. Jessie ate his dinner quickly and asked to be excused. Katie sat at the table, her body aching, her mind somewhere far away, counting the flowers on the wallpaper border above the kitchen window. 147 flowers circled the room. Katie had counted them every Sunday for 3 years. She would count them for 4 more years before anyone discovered the truth. The basement beneath the Hollister farmhouse measured approximately 20 by 30 feet, with concrete floors and exposed wooden beams. Donald had renovated the space in the fall of 1983, telling neighbors he was building a rec room for the children. He installed carpet remnants he'd collected from a construction site, brought in a space heater purchased at a yard sale, and mounted a deadbolt lock on the inside of the basement door that could only be operated from the main floor. Linda documented the Sunday sessions in a spiral notebook discovered years later in the attic, using coded language she claimed was for record-keeping purposes. Entries described which men attended, how much they paid, and clinical notes about Katie's cooperation level. The amounts varied. Vernon Tackett typically paid $200. Others paid between 50 and 100 depending on how long they stayed. The basement contained a mattress with no bed frame pushed against the far wall. Several storage bins lined the opposite side, filled with children's clothing in various sizes, dresses mostly in soft colors. Linda kept them organized by size, replacing items as Katie grew. A Polaroid camera sat on a wooden shelf Donald had built into the wall, along with stacks of film cartridges. Linda would remain in the basement during the sessions. Sometimes she participated, sometimes she photographed. Always she was present, watching with an expression Katie came to recognize as detachment, as though her mother had trained herself to see these acts as transactions rather than violations. She focused on a water stain on the ceiling that resembled, to her young mind, a rabbit. She counted the wooden beams overhead. 14 beams ran the length of the basement. She counted them dozens of times during each session, sometimes reaching numbers in the hundreds before the men finished. In winter months, the basement stayed cold despite the heater's efforts, and Katie would shiver in the thin dresses Linda made her wear. In summer, the basement became stifling, the air thick and difficult to breathe. The small window near the ceiling, covered with a piece of plywood Donald had nailed over it, allowed no ventilation. After each man finished, Linda would clean Katie with mechanical efficiency, whispering instructions to stay still, to be quiet, to remember this was helping the family. Linda's hands were always cold. Katie remembered that detail with strange clarity. Her mother's hands were always cold, even in summer. The sessions lasted anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on how many men attended. Katie learned to recognize the sound of the deadbolt sliding open, signaling the ordeal was ending. Linda would help her dress, usually in different clothes than she'd worn coming down. The white cotton dress would go into a laundry basket. Linda washed it every Monday morning. Upstairs, Jessie would still be watching television, surrounded by candy wrappers. Donald would be in the kitchen counting money at the table. Their vehicles disappeared down the gravel road. The house would smell like lemonade and something else Katie couldn't name, something metallic and wrong. Linda would start dinner. Donald would ask Jessie about his afternoon. Katie would sit on the couch, staring at the television screen without seeing it. Her mind still counting ceiling beams, still tracing the shape of the water-stained rabbit, still somewhere far away from her body,